I'm Elaine. I still remember the day my father, with a face red with rage, pointed at the door and shouted, "Get out. Her big day doesn't need a selfish, ungrateful like you." His voice echoed in the room, and my stepmother, Laura, smirked behind him. My stepsister, Lily, fake cried in her designer dress, whispering loud enough for me to hear, "She's always trying to ruin everything." I looked at the man who once called me his pride and joy and simply said, "Fine." 2 weeks ago, he threw me out of the house I grew up in. The same daughter who spent 4 hours in surgery donating bone marrow to save Lily's life. The same daughter who'd been quietly paying $138,000 of her medical debt for 4.5 years while they planned a $165,000 dream wedding. The next morning, I heard my father say, "Good," as he looked at my empty room. He thought nothing would ruin Lily's wedding now. But yesterday, the venue manager, a woman they didn't know, walked into their final meeting, placed an old hospital file on the table, and said words that changed everything. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was 16 when my mother, a warm-hearted woman named Grace, lost her battle with leukemia after an 18-month fight. I watched her fade away in that hospice bed. She used to dance in the kitchen while making Sunday pancakes, sing off the key to the radio, and made our home feel like a safe haven. On the night she died, she held my hand. Her fingers were cold and papery. She looked into my eyes and whispered, "Be strong, baby. Don't let anyone make you feel small." 3 hours later, she was gone. My father, Richard, didn't shed a tear at the funeral. I noticed, even though I was drowning in grief. He stood by the casket with dry eyes, accepting condolences as if he was checking items off a list. In the car on the way home, he took off his tie and said, "We'll get through this." Little did I know he meant forgetting her. The weeks after Mom's death were a blur. I slept in her bed for a month because it still smelled like her lavender lotion. I kept finding her long, dark hair on the pillow and couldn't bring myself to vacuum it up. Dad threw himself into work, coming home later and later. Some nights, I ate cereal alone at the kitchen island while he sat in the garage with a bottle of whiskey. I was 16, trying to keep the house running, doing laundry, and cooking simple meals. I pretended to be okay so he wouldn't have to worry. But every time I passed the family photos in the hallway, I felt a piece of me break. Mom was disappearing from the walls, and it felt like she was disappearing from our lives too. 9 months later, Dad told me he was getting married again. I came home from school one day and found him sitting at the kitchen table with a woman I'd never met. Her name was Laura. She had sleek black hair, perfect makeup, and a smile that seemed rehearsed. "Elaine, honey," she said, standing up. "I've heard so much about you." I could tell she was lying. Behind her was a 13-year-old girl, Lily, Laura's daughter. She had her mother's dark hair and watchful eyes. Dad cleared his throat and said, "Laura and I are engaged. We're getting married in August." I stared at him in disbelief. August? This August? I wanted to say, "You don't get to decide what Mom would want. You don't get to erase her in 9 months. But instead, I said nothing. At the engagement dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant, which made it even more painful, Laura smiled at me across the table. "Elaine, honey, I'm not trying to replace your mom. I just want us to be a family." It felt more like a warning than a promise. Lily whispered something to Laura in French. I didn't understand the words, but I saw Laura's expression change. There was a look between them, a bond one wasn't a part of. Dad married Laura that August, and by September, they moved into our house. By October, things started to disappear. Mom's photos came down first. "Too painful for your father," Laura explained as she boxed them up. Then Mom's books, her old guitar, and her gardening tools were gone. One day, I came home from school and Mom's guitar, the one she'd had since college, was missing. "Where's the guitar?" I asked. Laura was arranging Lily's art supplies on the cleared space. "We needed room, honey." Lily's quite talented. That was my mom's, I said. I know, but it was just taking up space. Nobody played it anymore, she replied without asking if I wanted it. As time went on, the pattern became clear. At Christmas 2017, Laura replaced Mom's traditional apple pie with her own cherry pie recipe. New family traditions, she announced cheerfully. Lily got the biggest pile of presents, while mine were practical things like socks and a planner. When I opened a small photo album I'd made of Mom's old recipes, Laura smiled politely and set it aside. That's sweet, honey, she said, and it never made it under the tree again. School events were no better. Lily's dance recitals got the whole family in the front row with flowers. My academic award ceremony? Dad came alone and left early for a work call. Laura redecorated my bedroom while I was at a weekend science competition. When I came home, my posters were gone, replaced by neutral gray walls and a guest room feel. We thought you'd like it fresher for when you visit from college, she said. I was still living there. Holidays stopped including Mom's traditions. No more Thanksgiving turkey with Mom's special stuffing, no more New Year's Eve champagne toast. Laura had her own traditions, Lily's traditions. I spent more and more time at my best friend Mia's house. Her mom asked me once, gently, "How are things at home, Elaine?" I lied and said, "Fine." By 2021, I'd learned to be invisible. I was 22, finishing my degree at the local university. I lived on campus, came home maybe twice a month, and stayed quiet. I thought that was how it would be forever. But then Lily got sick. One midnight in June 2021, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice was hollow. "Lily's in the hospital. It's serious. You need to come." I drove to the hospital in my pajamas and found Dad and Laura in the waiting room. They looked shattered. Dad's face was gray, and Laura's makeup was smeared from crying. "What happened?" I asked. Dad looked up and said, "It's leukemia. The same disease that took Mom." The diagnosis was acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive and life-threatening. Without treatment, the doctor said Lily had 4 to 8 months. With treatment, including chemotherapy, radiation, and a bone marrow transplant, she had a 65 to 75% chance of 5-year survival. But she needed a donor. They tested Dad first. He was a partial match, 5 out of 10 HLA markers, not enough. Laura wasn't biologically related, so she couldn't match. That left me. For 7 days, I waited for the results. Every night, I Googled bone marrow donation, read about the 4-hour surgery, weeks of recovery, and possible complications. I read survivor stories and donor stories, stories about pain that lasted months. But I didn't care. Lily was 18. I wasn't going to let her die if I could help it. On the 7th day, the doctor called. "Elaine, you're a perfect match, 10 out of 10. In an early July family meeting with Dr. Harris, the oncologist, he laid out the situation clearly. Without a transplant from me, Lily's survival chances dropped to less than 20%. Dad looked at me across the hospital table. "Elaine," his voice broke, "will you?" "Yes," I said. "Of course." The doctor was brutally honest, showing us charts, survival rates, and the risks for me as a donor. Dad kept nodding, but his eyes were glassy. Laura cried quietly into a tissue. Lily looked terrified. When the doctor asked if I understood I might face long-term side effects like chronic pain, fatigue, and even fertility issues, I swallowed hard and said yes. A nurse named Emily, in her mid-40s with kind eyes, gave me a small encouraging nod from the corner of the room. I clung to that nod like a lifeline. Laura started crying real tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Lily, pale and thin from chemo, looked at me with frightened eyes. "Will it hurt you?" I lied. "Not really." The night before the surgery, I was alone in the pre-op room. Dad visited for 10 minutes. He stood in the doorway, looking unsure. "You don't have to do this," he said finally. "Yes, I do," I replied. He nodded and left without saying thank you. Laura sent a text, "We're praying for you." Lily didn't visit. She was too sick. A nurse came in to check my vitals. It was Emily. "I'll be here when you wake up," she said. "You're doing something extraordinary." I didn't feel extraordinary. I felt scared. On August 15, 2021, after 4 hours under general anesthesia, I woke up in excruciating pain. My hips, lower back, and entire pelvis were on fire. Emily was there, as she promised. "You did it," she said softly. "Lily's transplant is starting now." I tried to speak but couldn't. I just nodded and passed out again. I was hospitalized for 3 days. The pain was constant, an 8 or 9 out of 10 even with medication. I couldn't sit up or walk without help. Physical therapy was torture. Dad visited twice, staying maybe 10 minutes each time. He asked how I was feeling, said Lily was doing well, and then left. Laura visited once. I kept track, I don't know why. Maybe because when you're in that much pain, alone most of the time, you notice who shows up and who doesn't. Lily's room was across the hall. I could see the visitors coming and going, with balloons, flowers, and cards. Laura practically lived there, and Dad was there every day. Emily noticed too. On the second day after the operation, I pressed the call button because I needed help getting to the bathroom. Emily came immediately. "Where's your dad?" she asked, helping me stand. I checked the board outside my door where they logged visitors. "With Lily," I said. Emily's mouth tightened, but she didn't say anything. On the day of discharge, I needed a wheelchair. Laura said, "We'll pick you up after we check on Lily." They were an hour late. The first 2 weeks at home were a nightmare. The extraction sites on my hips throbbed constantly. I couldn't lie on my back. Showers took 45 minutes because I had to sit on a plastic chair. Dad would poke his head in, ask, "You good?" and then disappear to Lily's room. Laura brought me soup once and left the bowl on the nightstand without a word. One night at 3 a.m. I was feverish and crying silently into my pillow, scrolling through old photos of Mom on my phone. That's when I realized I'd given part of my body to keep Lily alive, but in this house, I was still invisible. Home recovery was worse than the hospital. An infection set in at the extraction sites. I had a fever and had to take antibiotics. I couldn't return to university for the fall semester. I stayed at Dad's house because I couldn't manage the stairs at my campus apartment. I felt like a ghost living there. They were so focused on Lily, her recovery, her check-ups, and her medication schedule that I disappeared into the walls. In September 2021, Lily came home. She was weak but improving. Cancer-free, the doctors said. It was a miracle. At Thanksgiving that year, Lily was healthy enough to come to dinner. Everyone celebrated. Laura made a toast. "To Lily," she said, raising her glass. "Our survivor." I was sitting right there, in a heating pad, still in pain 4 months later, taking painkillers like candy. No one toasted the donor. In December 2021, a medical bill arrived. Total charges were $680,000. Insurance paid $520,000. The patient responsibility was $160,000. I opened it in the kitchen and stared at the number, feeling sick. Dad walked in, saw the paper in my hands. "Insurance will handle it," he said, took the bill, and filed it somewhere. I wanted to believe him. 3 months after the donation, in October 2021, my phone rang while I was in the campus library trying to catch up on coursework I'd missed. It was a collection agency. MS. "Elaine, This is regarding an outstanding medical balance of $160,000 for treatment provided to Lily in June and July 2021. We need to discuss payment arrangements. My stomach dropped. I called Dad immediately. Dad, there's a $160,000 medical bill. There was silence on the other end. Dad? I asked. I declared bankruptcy last month, Elaine. I can't help, he said. I felt the world tilt. Bankruptcy? When? I asked. January, he replied. It was the best option. I didn't know they'd come after you, he said. I was furious. You didn't think. You let the insurance lapse between jobs in June, right when Lily got sick. And now I'm responsible. There was another long silence. I'm sorry, Elaine, he said and hung up. I sat in the library for 2 hours, staring at nothing. Then I looked up bankruptcy law, credit collection law, and medical debt law. The debt was legally collectible. Dad had declared bankruptcy, removing his liability. The next responsible party was family. I'd signed consent forms for the donation, and my name was in the files. They could pursue me. I was 22 years old with $160,000 in medical debt for saving my stepsister's life. I met with the hospital billing department in November. They offered a payment plan of $2,380 a month for 7 years. My income at the time was $18 an hour as a graphic design intern plus some freelance work. My total monthly income after taxes was about $2,800. Rent was $1,200, food was $400, insurance was $180, and gas was $150. I can't afford this, I told the billing coordinator. She looked at me with practiced sympathy. We can work with you on reduced payments. How reduced? I asked. Maybe $1,500 a month? She said. I laughed bitterly. I'll starve. I'll note that you need financial hardship consideration, she said, typing. Someone will call you. But nobody called. I started working 3 jobs. I was a graphic design intern 40 hours a week, did freelance work 10 to 15 hours whenever I could get clients, and delivered food on the weekends. I moved to a studio apartment for $1,200 a month, the cheapest I could find that wasn't dangerous. I ate ramen, rice and beans, and peanut butter sandwiches. I stopped going out and dating. Every spare dollar went to that debt. I set up an anonymous GoFundMe. Help bone marrow donor pay medical debt. I wrote the story carefully, no names, just facts. In 2021, I donated bone marrow to save my stepsister's life. Due to insurance gaps, I'm responsible for $160,000 in medical debt. I've been working 3 jobs to pay it down. Any help appreciated. Over 2 years, it raised $9,800. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't enough. I paid $2,550 a month every month for 4.5 years. Some months, I made rent by $100. Some months, I didn't make rent and borrowed from Mia. I delivered food until 2 a.m. On weekends, driving past bars where people my age were laughing, drinking, and living. I went home to spreadsheets, bills, and payment confirmations. By April 2026, I'd paid $138,000. The remaining balance was $22,000. My credit score was destroyed. I had late payments, maxed out credit cards, and collection calls. But I was proud. Exhausted, but proud. I ran into Lily once at a coffee shop in June 2024. She was with friends, laughing. She saw me, waved awkwardly, and didn't introduce me. I checked her Instagram sometimes. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see if she ever mentioned me. She didn't. Her graduation photos from the university, new job announcements, vacation photos from the Caribbean, and a boyfriend named Jake. Good-looking, successful, smiling in every photo. And survivor posts. Cancer-free for 3 years. #blessed, #survivor, #living my best life. Never once did she mention that I saved her life. In March 2026, I made payment number 54. $138,000 total paid. I screenshot the confirmation on my phone. I thought about sending it to Lily but didn't. She was in Hawaii that week, posting sunset photos with captions like, "Grateful for this beautiful life." My beautiful life was ramen and spreadsheets. Then Dad texted, "Can we talk? It's about Lily's wedding." The Instagram post appeared at 11 p.m. Lily and Jake at a famous bookstore downtown. He'd proposed in the rare books section. Romantic, public, perfectly Instagrammable. The ring was massive. I Googled it later. Similar styles ran $12,000. The caption,